Let's answer some questions. Why you bald? Genetics, maybe also depression, but probably mostly genetics. This video might have been a mistake. Hello and welcome to the Chemist's Codex. My name is Peter and I like to tell stories about whatever happens to catch my interest because I believe those stories can teach us more about ourselves. But today, I'm not telling a story, I'm answering your questions. A bit ago, I put out a call for questions and I got some, so we're gonna go ahead and answer them. Why are you called Chemist's Codex? Well, I am a chemist. I have a master's degree in chemistry, so that part of the name should make sense. I think it's the Codex where people might get a bit confused, because I think I'm more than just a chemist. I also like comic books and D&D and pretty much anything else with pop culture. So I wanted to have a title that reflected that, and Codex to me invokes a sort of mystical tome of knowledge type thing. So that's what I went with, and Chemist's Codex has a nice alliteration to it, which helps make the channel more memorable, I feel. And I also want to take this opportunity to just state something. I am not the Chemist's Codex. The Chemist's Codex is the channel. I am the chemist of the Chemist's Codex. I am the chemist and the channel is my codex. Have I said chemist and codex enough? How old are you? I am 29 years old. I don't know if I look 29, but that's how old I am. Using only materials from the D&D official books, what's the largest explosion I could create completely realistically? So there are a couple possible things you might want to look at. One being the actual size of the explosion, and one being the amount of damage done by the explosion. So the first thing I was inclined to look at was Fireball, which is a 20-foot radius sphere and does 8d6 damage at its normal level, but if you upcast it all the way to 9th level, it can deal 12d6 damage. However, continuing on with spells, you might also take a look at Meteor Swarm, a 9th level spell. It creates 4 separate explosions, if you consider a meteor impact to be an explosion, and those have a radius of 40 feet. And you can choose to have those hit wherever you want, so you can arrange them in a way to have an explosion with a radius of 80 feet. That's the largest explosion I've been able to find in terms of physical size, but in terms of amount of damage done, there's a magic item that I think would be better. That being the Staff of the Magi. Specifically, the Staff of the Magi has a feature called the Retributive Strike, where if you break the staff over your leg, it creates an explosion, and the amount of damage done is reliant on how many charges the staff has. If you have a fully charged staff with 50 charges and you use the Retributive Strike, it will deal 800 points of damage to yourself and 300 points of damage to anyone around you. That's the highest damage explosion I've been able to find, so I would go with either Meteor Swarm if you want size, or the Staff of the Magi Retributive Strike if you want damage. How much time is left? I think about 9, maybe 10, but it is going to happen, so be ready. Soup or salad? Personally, I'm more of a salad guy. I don't really like soup all that much, but in the words of Thomas Tomska Ridgewell, soup is just blended salad. Why do bases also dissolve things like acids? Aren't those two opposites? And what pH do you think the sun's core is? So acids and bases aren't really opposites, they're more two sides of the same coin. Depending on what definition of acid and base you use, acids will either donate a proton or accept a pair of electrons, and bases will either accept a proton or donate a pair of electrons. And that sort of action is really how they dissolve things. Acids dissolve things by ripping electrons away, bases dissolve things by donating electrons to it. As for the pH of the sun's core, the question unfortunately is kind of inherently flawed, as pH is really defined by an aqueous solution in water. And since the sun's core is not an aqueous solution, it by definition doesn't really have a pH. Why is your jaw turning purple? Well, I have a light over here that I have set to a purple color because I think that makes the lighting a bit more interesting and dynamic. I don't know if it is, but I like it, so I use it. What item in D&D would be the closest to a Power Rangers morpher? So there are 2 possible items I've identified that could potentially fit this idea. The first being the Glamored Studded Leather Armor. This is a +1 suit of studded leather armor that allows you to make it look like any sort of clothes or any other set of armor. However, since Power Rangers have more of a monk vibe to me, I decided to look for something else since monks don't really use armor. and I've determined the Hat of Disguise can also be rather useful for this concept. The Hat of Disguise allows you to cast the Disguise Self spell on you pretty much at will. I didn't see any restrictions on number of times you can cast it. The spell lasts for an hour, but it is purely illusory, so it doesn't really give you any benefits, but it can still, make your appearance change, which I think is more what the Power Rangers Morpher really does. Could you review Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz? So I have talked about that book in my first video on the Oz book series if you want to go ahead and check that out, but I will recap my feelings on that book here. I did not care for Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz. It felt largely pointless to me, and it just kind of makes me frustrated. It's called Dorothy and the Wizard in Oz, but it takes them 2/3 of the book to actually get to Oz. What shape would chairs be if our legs bent the other way? So I'm going to answer this question using chemistry, because there is a type of molecule called cyclohexane, which can be branched off into a whole host of molecules, but it has two main conformers, one of them being the chair conformer, as seen here, the other being the boat conformer. And if our legs bent the other way, I would say that is what chairs would look like. Boats. What happens when I pour H2O into H2O? My chemistry teacher canceled this lab because she got sick on the day we were supposed to do the safety lab. So since you mentioned this was a safety lab, I assume the answer is probably going to be nothing. It's mainly just to teach you basic laboratory techniques. And I will say for that, if you pour something, commit to the pour, otherwise it's just going to dribble down the side and make a mess. But this does bring up an interesting concept in what happens if you add water to a different type of water. If you add fresh water to salt water, they could have different densities and could mix in an interesting way. Or if you have hot water and cold water, you can also get an interesting way of mixing. But if you just add a type of water to itself, nothing interesting is going to happen. Who is the best comic villain and why? And who is the worst? Why? So there are two ways I'm choosing to interpret this question, one being who is the best character, and one being who is the best at being a villain. So in terms of the best character that's a villain, I would probably say Dr. Doom. As for why, I just find Dr. Doom to be really interesting. He wants to rule the world, but not because he craves power. He wants to rule the world out of sheer ego. Dr. Doom sincerely believes that the world would be better if he ruled it. As for the character that is the best at being a villain, I would probably say Norman Osborn. He has the power and resources and will to be a villain. He knows he's a bad guy and he doesn't care. As for the worst villains, I would say the worst character who is a villain, I'm gonna say Null, the King in Black. I know a lot of people kind of like that character. I just find him pointless and unnecessary, and I don't care for the King in Black stuff. As for the character who is the worst at being a villain, I'm gonna go with Asbestos Man. At this point, he's just a punchline who has cancer. What is the most tomfoolery that can happen from a single chemical reaction? So my first thought is to go with the elephant's toothpaste demonstration. Big mess of foam, it's fun, it feels very tomfoolery to me. And while it's not technically a chemical reaction, there is a very famous chemistry prank called the disappearing spoon, where you have a spoon made of gallium that you give to a colleague of yours to stir their tea, and as the colleague stirs their tea, the spoon melts since gallium has a very low melting point, and the spoon disappears, hence the name Disappearing Spoon. So that's all the questions I have for this go around. If you want me to answer more of your questions, go ahead and leave them on this video. I do really enjoy answering questions from people. It's fun to talk about the things that I'm into. And hopefully, if you don't know what kind of questions to ask, this video will give you a bit of an idea of the kinds of things I like to talk about. And if you want to see your question get answered, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next time I answer your questions.